Good morning. My name is Letícia Oliveira.
And I'm Leonardo Vieira.
Thank you so much for joining us in the second day of our 6th U.S. Spiritist Medical Congress and the 2nd International Spiritist Medical Congress. We would like to thank Bradley Applin and Francisco Vieira for their work yesterday, and we hope to bring the same joy on the second day of this event.
First, a few reminders. And some of the lectures of this afternoon will not be in English, so we ask everyone that if you would like to follow these lectures in the afternoon to get a translation device as well in the back. We also have some books available for purchase during the break of this wonderful day. And if you buy two or more books, you will be getting a gift from Dr. Petillo, one of his books that will accompany your purchase. This event also will be broadcast live through Fab TV, and you can follow it through www.febtv.com.br, and it is channel 4. For your friends or family members who could not attend today, they can follow us live through Fab TV. We would like also to thank our sponsors, the contributors of this beautiful event, and we hope that we all have a great day today.
Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Etzel Cardeña. Dr. Cardeña is licensed as a clinical psychologist. He holds the endowed Thorsen Chair in Psychology at Lund University in Sweden, where he directs the Center for Research on Consciousness and Anomalous Psychology. His areas of research include extraordinary anomalous experiences, dissociative processes, and acute post-traumatic reactions, hypnosis, and the stream of consciousness. He has delivered keynote speeches and workshops in 4 continents and has more than 300 scientific publications. Please welcome Dr. Etzel Cardeña.
Good morning, bom dia. Hello. First, I would like to give my appreciation and thanks to the very gracious invitation of Sonia Doi. She is the reason I am here and back in a place that I had left a number of years ago, and I am very happy to be here. And I would also like to thank the people, all of the organizers, and particularly Ricardo and Cicero, who have been very helpful. I assume that in order to fast forward, do I press green? Okay, thank you. So now I will continue. That is the topic of my talk, and those are the topics that I will be covering. First, I will talk about what I mean by anomalous experiences. Then I will briefly talk about the history, because in a sense, when I'm talking about the new psychology, that new, I am making reference to the fact that psychology really started to a large degree as a discipline that was very much concerned with extraordinary experiences. It somehow lost its way, at least as far as giving a comprehensive view of the human, and now I think it is coming back to a large degree. Then I will talk about individual differences, that is, do people differ in whether they are prone to have unusual experiences? For example, there was a question yesterday, do we know who are the people who are more likely to have near-death experiences? I think we are far from having a precise answer, but we do have some inkling about who is more likely to have generally unusual experiences, even near-death experiences. So I'll cover that. Then the differences between anomalous experiences and psychopathology, and then I will get from getting into psychopathology to getting into the more positive aspect. Is it any good for people to have some anomalous experiences? Can they help you? And we got an inkling in yesterday's lecture, but I will be a bit more broad about that. Briefly talk about anomalous experiences and the neurosciences, and then I think the more challenging question for I think a number of you, which is, can some anomalous experiences give us a sense of reality, of how our mind works and how our mind connects to what we think of as reality? So that is the menu. Okay, and here is the cover of the menu. So if you want to know more about that, that is the second edition of a book we edited, published by the American Psychological Association, which already is a sedge into what I'm talking about, because the fact that the largest psychological association in the world, the American Psychological Association, would publish a book on this, now in its second edition, is already giving us a sense that there is an openness that hadn't been there for a number of decades. So what do I mean by, okay, good, from anomalous? And the word comes from the Greek anomalos, which means exceptional or dissimilar. More specifically, what we mean by anomalous is something that is not necessarily abnormal. And by abnormal, I mean pathological. So there are some anomalous experiences that are definitely linked in some people with their pathology, but overall, generally, there is no necessary connection between anomalous experience and pathology, and I'll briefly go through the empirical research about that. Nor are they normal, and normal I put in quotation marks. Because of course, being normal doesn't mean that one is healthy. Just look at our culture, look at the cultures everywhere at any time. I don't think there has been any time, any place, where you could say, oh yes, most of the people are having healthy, productive, fulfilling lives. So, but it's not ordinary, it's not the typical thing that you can go to a job interview at USUS or something like that and easily start saying, well, yes, I'm right now having an out-of-body experience, so hold on for a second, and then I'll come back and continue chatting with you. So it's supposed to be somehow being different, but, and I put here in parentheses, that always depends of what particular culture we are talking about and at what time. So again, using an unnamed university, medical university here in this area, you could not go to a meeting and say, again, hold on, I'm having an out-of-body experience, but I'll come back. That probably would not go very well with your next job review. But if you are like one of the forest people that was described by Colin Turnbull, and you say, I am sensing right now all of the forces and spirits around me, that would be perfectly fine. I think what would be really not normal is if you said, I want to be here, so let me take photographs of everything and let me put in my iPhone what I'm doing, while being completely oblivious of what surrounds me. That would be very abnormal, I think, or not normal. So that is what I mean. So anomalous experiences, oops, sorry, well, that went, don't know if I can go back. No. Maybe this? Yes. An anomalous experience can be something that is uncommon, such as synesthesia, in which a person, for instance, may associate in his or her experience a color with a particular tone, with a particular musical note. So people who have visual auditory anesthesia, in addition to hear, let's say, Messiaen's Turangalila Symphony, what they do as well is that they're having a panoply of colors being displayed either, in a sense, in front of their eyes or in their mind's eye. We know that is very uncommon. It happens maybe 1 in some thousands, or perhaps in most latest surveys, 1 in some hundreds of people. It is not that common. So it may be something that is uncommon or something that is not uncommon. We know from reviews that most people in most countries where these studies have been conducted do say that at some point they have had something that might be called parapsychological. They had a dream about something that happened in the future. They suddenly had a hunch that somebody close to them was having some problem, and the majorities of people in the survey say this. But of course, this is not something that in our particular culture at our particular time is considered to be the norm. That may change. Anomalous experiences can be spontaneous or they can be induced. Example, what are called synesthetes spontaneously have the kind of experience that I told you about where sensory modalities are matched, coupled. But you can also induce them. For most of us, we will not have any sense of what that is unless we maybe have a psychedelic, a strong psychedelic, and at times may, at the same time that we listen to music, see again a panorama of colors. One thing for those of you who may have heard about the term exceptional human experiences by White, it's not exactly the same, because in exceptional human experiences, the assumption is that they are always or could always potentially be positive, a form of growth. And we really stay more neutral about that, because I think some anomalous experiences are indeed positive and helpful, but some of them are associated with pathology and are not, I think, necessarily conducive to growth. So if you listen, for instance, to a voice that is giving you good advice, like it happened in Socrates, arguably the first great Western philosopher, and tells you don't go that way, because if you go with the other soldiers, you will get captured and killed. So you go the other way, and that's exactly what happens. Your colleagues end up being captured and killed. That is positive. If a voice gives you that kind of advice, heed it, listen to it. If a voice, on the other hand, is telling you you are worthless, you are nothing, you may be listening to a presidential debate here, or, or if it's more internal voice, don't listen to it. Try to understand where it comes from. Try to deal with it, but do not heed what it is telling you. So what do I mean by anomalous experiences? Things that we have been talking about already in this conference, such as out-of-body experiences, shamanism, in which people may feel that they go into an upper or lower world, near-death experiences, mystical experiences, which of course is a core of a number of religious beliefs, and such things are what we talk about. And there is, of course, many more, but that will give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So briefly now about history. Anomalous experiences have attracted all throughout recent Western history condemnation, and recent, I should say, many centuries long history have attracted condemnation. So the mystics, let's say, if we go some centuries before in Western history, some people regarded them as being enlightened, and some people thought that they were very dangerous. More recently, Maudsley in the 19th century talked about mediumship attracting sick people who become worse during its practice. So sorry to tell some of you, but you must have been sick, and I'm sure you have gotten a lot worse, or maybe not. So that is what a very famous physician wrote. Some psychologists sort of wrote about the same thing, Hall and Jastrow, writing about interest in the occult, which they meant interest in mediumship, religious experiences, spiritism, and so on. They said it is intrinsically pathological, without any evidence actually to back that assertion, but they just said it. A number of anthropologists talked about shamans being psychotic or at least neurotic. Even more recently, a neurologist wrote in The Brain, a book called The Brain, Mystics and Schizophrenics Share Disordered Brains. I would like to order one for myself, at least a mystic brain, not a psychotic brain. But there have always been, also from the start of the beginning of the inception of psychology, dissenting views. And that is William James, who has also been mentioned here, as well as F.W.H. Myers, who talked about waking consciousness being just but one type of states, and that we could not have a complete account if we do not have a sense of these other forms of consciousness and these other anomalous experiences. And incidentally, William James did have a number of writings in which he said some of these anomalous experiences can give us an objectively accurate view of reality. So I'll come back to that. And just the last thing about history, so that you know that at the beginning, psychology was very much concerned with anomalous experiences. Here are some of the people who were in charge of the organization of the first most important congresses of psychology, the international congresses. The first one, the first international congress, the president was Rivot, a Frenchman who did a lot of work on dissociation. The secretary was a Nobel Prize winner, Charles Richet, who also incidentally, besides getting his Nobel Prize in medicine, in traditional medicine, did a lot of very good research on hypnosis and on what we call parapsychological phenomena. Second Congress, the president was Henry Sidgwick, one of the big founders of the Society for Psychical Research. The secretary for the third one was another parapsychologist or parapsychology researcher. So at the beginning, there was a lot of interest, and people were assuming this is something that we need to understand and explain. But and William James, of course, perhaps the most eminent psychologist in history, was very much interested in dissociation and mediumship and hypnosis and so on. But the political forces as they were at that time, what ended up occurring is that religious experiences continued to be tolerated as long as they were considered to be just experiences and having no currency, no import, nothing to say about reality. So when the more dominant people like Calvin S. Hall and others ended up taking over more of the power after William James was waning and so on, they said, well, as far as you religious people want to talk about, you can talk about psychology of religion, just say those are experiences that have nothing to do with reality, we will tolerate. But the parapsychologists and other people who were insisting, no, we need to study if this kind of experiences tell us something about how not only how our mind works, but how we can comprehend reality. That was not accepted, and they were pretty much excluded from then on until recently. So that is a bit of history. As I tell you, I think now we're getting a bit more openness. A number of us are writing on different areas of anomalous psychology. So let me go to the next point, which is, do people vary in their propensity to have these unusual experiences? And the short answer is absolutely. In a sense, it would be difficult to assume that something that is so central that we would be just homogeneously the same. The same way that art talent, no matter what some people who teach courses say, is not normally distributed. And you have at the end of the distribution the Picassos. Somewhere in the middle you have some people who can learn to paint and draw. And at the other end of the distribution you have me, who can't even draw a stick figure. There is that distribution as well, and probably even much more skewed, if anybody knows what I'm talking about, with regard to anomalous experiences. And this is nothing new. In his dialogue, Plato in 69 wrote, many bear the Bacchic road, and Bacchae was a sect that involved also some very ecstatic, emotionally intense experiences. Said, many bear the Bacchic road, which you can see there, but few are Bacchants. And at least this could be interpreted as he's saying, many people are going into these rituals, are part of this sects or religious cults or groups, but few people really can experience the core of them. So leaving Plato aside, although I think we know very little that Plato had not already anticipated and written about, what do we know about individual differences and anomalous experiences in general? First, as regard age, there are very few differences found so far. Spontaneous past life experiences, which also were mentioned yesterday, typically occur with children when they are, in a sense, developing their sense of self. Between 2 and 6 years of age, that's when it tends to happen, more or less. And of course, it makes sense, because that is a time, if you read Susan Harter, where we are developing a more coherent sense of self. And at that time, it may be an issue of somebody saying, well, I'm not quite sure who I am. I have a body of a little child, but I'm also having memories that earlier on I was an adult and I want to go back to my wife. I don't know what we will do because I have the body of a 3-year-old, but we'll see. So that tends to happen, small children. And on the other side, mystical experiences tend to be more common with people who are middle-aged or older. And that had been reported traditionally in Eastern religions, but of course we know also happens in the West with a few studies that have been done. And I think probably so that has something to do not only with the impending greater sense of death, but with the fact that at middle age, older middle age, people start becoming more introspective. They no longer have to be so focused on making money, raising children, and so on. They can turn inward and find out what it is. Gender, not many differences. Women overall report more ostensible parapsychological phenomena such as telepathy. They tend to be more spirit devotees. I think very likely if you go to I don't know if you have a research on Spiritists. More women than men? No, you are about the same. More women, more women. That tends to be the case, and if you go to spiritual workshops and groups and so on, that's what you tend to find. But of course, and what you also will find is that they may be culturally described gender roles. So among the Johansi, what used to be the Kung, but now that is how it should be pronounced, the men and women have different roles. So the culture itself engages in doing psychological and physical. They don't make that distinction that we do healing, but the men are the ones who are doing the more extroverted, dancing, let me just use a sexist term, hysterical kind of manifestations, because that refers to women, the hysteron. So the men do that, and the women are more restrained, playing the drums and helping the men do their manifestations. Again, please do not think about presidential debates. It has nothing to do with that. Okay? As regards differences in socioeconomic status, social marginality, that is whether people tend to be socially successful, have jobs or not, or intelligence, no difference. The people who are in Spiritist groups and other people who are very interested in these areas generally do not significantly differ from the population at large in any of this variables. So how are we going to describe what is this kind of trait? We know that generally it happens across. Some people, I was making a joke about not talking about your out of experience while you're having a job interview, so that is one person having one. And the most influential personality taxonomy in psychology is called the five-factor model, or FFM. It does not talk about that propensity, but a number of other constructs, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of those, but that is just for comprehension, to have a number of different kinds of personality-like constructs, such as self-transcendence in a personality taxonomy by Cloninger, which is the second probably most influential personality taxonomy, talks about self-transcendence, which is a sense of interconnectedness. Absorption is another one, mental boundary thinness, for instance, a sense of whether you may feel that you're more permeable to influences from either other human beings or from what you may experience as spiritual beings. There are differences, and there are all of these constructs that have somehow to do with each other. We've done research on those, and they tend to correlate with each other, and people differ in how much they have. I'll skip this. So that is the second or the third point, whatever. We do have, I think, enough research to postulate that people differ in how much they are likely to be open to having these experiences. One of my main areas is hypnotizability. Some people write and say, well, everybody is equally hypnotizable, you just need to have the right hypnotist. Nonsense. I have done all kinds of different types of hypnosis, and there are some people who respond just without any training extremely well. And there are some other people who you tell them, well, just imagine that your stretched arm is very heavy, and they are just start imagining, how can it be heavy just because you say it? Well, I'm just thinking of the bones. It is not heavier than the kind of weight that I have from my bone and my muscles, blah, 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 blah. And they are not going to follow any of your suggestions, okay? So that is personality traits. So how about psychopathology? Won't go into details, but what I can tell you, and this is an example of synesthesia. Just imagine that these are written in black and white, but a person who has grapheme synesthesia, color chromatic grapheme synesthesia, instead of seeing them black and white, would see them in these colors. We know that synesthesia is not related to having psychopathology or having neuropathology or having something problematic with your nervous system. Having lucid dreams, dreams in which you know that you are dreaming, not related to it. Out-of-body experiences, not related to them. Actually, it seems to be the other way around in different surveys, that people who say they have frequent out-of-body experiences tend to have greater health. Spirit possession, there are a number of experts here. There is, again, overall, no relation between them. Devotees are usually as healthy as their counterpart, and I don't know if Alexander Moreira Almeida is here, but he has done a number of studies on this issue. Psi-related experience, parapsychological experiences, people saying, well, I can sense when something is going to happen in the future and so on. No evidence that overall people who report those experiences have any more psychopathology. No relation with people who say, I can heal with my energy, that they have more psychopathology. Actually, perhaps the opposite. With past life experiences, again, nothing except that there's a small relation in that most people, children who spontaneously report past life, will mention that they ended up being killed in some kind of violent event. So they may have some kind of phobias or post-traumatic symptoms, but at the same time, overall, they seem to be more intelligent than their counterparts in their culture. And even alien abduction experiences, where people may have memories or the experience of being abducted by aliens, generally they are healthy, even though the experience itself would seem to be distressing. So there is no relationship to that. And let me give you an example of research we did with Copenhagen with people who call themselves spiritual practitioners. They different names, but they may say, well, they read auras or they are interested in spiritualism or whatever. There are many different types. And what we did was compare the green is the psychic people, and the yellow is controls. People from the Copenhagen area who were known to be psychologically healthy. They were matched for age and gender, and there is no significant difference in a number of scales of what is known as the General Symptom Inventory, GSI, okay, for either depression, anxiety, somatization, psychoticism, and so on. They are pretty much as healthy. And in one of them, actually, phobic anxiety, that's here with, you can see that the psychic practitioners seem to actually be a bit less anxious than the population at large. So let's get a bit more challenging. How about hallucinations? Yesterday there was a mention about hallucinations and psychosis. Are people who hallucinate psychotic? Short answer, not necessarily. If you say so, you're going to be wrong 1/3 of the time at least, which is pretty high rate of being wrong. So research shows that about 1/3 of those who hear voices have perfectly good functioning, some of them perfectly fine. And we know that, for instance, also that, for example, prevalence of lifetime schizophrenia is about 0.3 to 0.7%, whereas hallucinations in the general population is a much higher percentage by degrees, 8 to 15%. So many more people in the culture are hearing voices or seeing things that others are not. You just don't hear, maybe here you will have people confess to you that they do. But overall, people don't talk very much about it in our culture, but 8 to 15%, that's pretty considerable, and we know that that's a much higher percentage than the people who have psychosis. There are as well some cultural differences. For instance, in the study by Nuevo et al., with many cultures, there was at least report, I don't know, one cannot always be sure of this, but the report is that 0.8% of the people in Vietnam reported hallucinations, and think about Vietnam having a history of more materialistic philosophy, versus 31% in Nepal. And unless you think that about 30% of the people, 1/3 of the people in Nepal are psychotic, you know that hallucinations are something else. And of course, hallucinations can be beneficial, as an example I gave of Socrates. Now, I have said overall, generally, there is no link. Again, there is no link between having anomalous experiences and psychopathology, which, as I said also a few minutes earlier, does not mean that there are not people who do have problems, who do have anomalous experiences and do have problems. So in that same study in Copenhagen, we also ended up talking with people who were psychic practitioners and so on, but were in a retreat. They had been some months in a center because they were having problems with how to deal with life. And we compared them with match control group. And this much smaller group of people did have a lot more depression, anxiety, somatization, significantly more. And just look at the difference between this green, which are the retreat psychic practitioners who are having problems, and the control groups. They are higher in everything. So what can one say? Yes, there is a subgroup of people who have anomalous experiences, the minority, who have pathology, but I always remind people the same way that there is also a subgroup of people who do not have anomalous experience who have psychopathology. So there is no necessary overlap between the two. Probably I'll skip this in the interest of time, but I will just summarize it in the sense that what makes an anomalous experience be related to psychopathology or not depends on a number of other factors. For example, attachment, your early relationship with your main caretakers. If you have, let's say, you're a fantasy-prone child, genetically, your genetic parents, very imaginative. You can have a sense, and I don't imagine imaginative is being wrong at all. I have a sense of internal creativity that is part of who you are. If you have supportive parents, you will likely become, or at least be, very interested in arts, and you may have a perfectly fine life. If your relationship, if you have what is called a disorganized attachment, then you may, because your parent, your main caretaker, is somehow feeling frightened or frightening towards you, then actually you may end up using that predisposition to tune out from threatening events in your environment. So this is a much more complicated model, but what it tells you is that whether something is positive or not depends on a number of other variables, not on just having anomalous experiences. So we are done with psychopathology, so let me get into the next point, which is, can anomalous experiences be beneficial? And the short answer is yes. There is a concept called schizotypy. That is, people, for example, who have biological relatives, close relatives who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Research has shown that a number of them, a majority of them, do not have schizophrenia, but do tend to have some not so common kind of constructs. Well, is being a schizotype pathological or a weakness, a psychological weakness? And the short answer is not. Because if you have what is called positive schizotypy, that is, if you have just unusual thoughts, unusual experiences, if you have some hallucinations, but are self-striving, are able to relate to other people, what is likely to happen to you is not that you're going to develop psychopathology, but that you are going to be more creative and you're having to just use divergent thinking to come up with the solution that was not the obvious one, but maybe the better one. Same thing can be said of similar constructs such as absorption, dissociation, hypnotizability, thin mental events. We did a study with some Dutch collaborators. It was mostly Mark van Ommeren. We found that traditional healers who were Bhutanese refugees in Nepal, when Bhutan people were having a totalitarian regime, that the healers were doing better psychologically than their counterparts. We heard yesterday about people who have near-death experiences, who have a number of positive outcomes, and the same thing exactly could be said about the majority of people who have mystical experiences. And to give you an example of creativity, unless there is a Swede here and a Swede that is interested in art, probably you will have no sense who that person is. But Hilma af Klint, Swedish painter who anticipated non-representational painting way before abstractionism. If you look at the history of pretty much almost any history of art, you will find out that the founders of abstractionism were Paul Klee, Vasily Kandinsky, and a few other men. But actually, and please don't laugh, there was somebody who anticipated and who was doing abstractionism many years before them, and it was a woman, Hilma af Klint. And there's a picture of her, and she said that what happened to her is that she would do just normal consciousness, very good naturalistic portraits of individuals. That's how she earned her living, but she also did her secret paintings, along with a small group of other female artists. And in this, she said, I'm not doing the painting. The pictures were painted directly through me without any preliminary drawings and with great force. And she was one good painter. I do not have an example of her work, but do check it in the internet. She has some extraordinary paintings, and it is amazing. And of course, we have some examples from Brazil as well of individuals who just automatically, without any drawing sketches, just go and proceed with something magnificent. So, can anomalous experiences be beneficial to you? Provided that you do not have other correlates that, in a sense, do not go well with having anomalous experience, the answer is absolutely yes. They can help you, they can make you more creative, more fulfilling, have a better sense of meaning of life, and so on. So this is just of course, I cannot go into any depth into the neurosciences and anomalous experience, but what I can tell you just in this slide is that when you have looked at neuroscientific research, for example, Blanke's work on out-of-body experience, you find that brain activity is generally consistent with the experience reported. So if you're having a synesthetic experience in which you are having listening to a tone and you're also having color experience simultaneously with those musical tones, you look at the brain and you will find that the areas that tend to become more active as you're listening to music is both the auditory association area, but also the visual association area. And of course, that is exactly what you're saying. You're having both an auditory and a visual experience. So there's no question, brain activity is generally very consistent with what the people are reporting, and things get a lot thornier when you're talking about anomalous experiences that are more complicated. For example, mystical experiences and so on. And I'm taking this comes from Carhart Harris, a paper that is called The Entropic Brain. And he published some results from his research with psychedelics, with LSD, which is very consistent with some research I did with hypnotizability with very high hypnotizable people. 5? 10? No, thank you. Easy. So what he has been done research with people with psychedelics, but it is very consistent with research without psychedelics that I have carried out with those individuals who are prone to respond very strongly to hypnotic suggestions. So what he says, and he is, I think, more, shall we say, traditional than I do, is that the normal waking consciousness of healthy adult humans, and again, I think most of what we think as healthy adult is not that healthy, but in any case, that around here, what you have is a kind of functioning brain that tends to show low disorder, low entropy. That is, there is not much changes. You already have your brain network systems previously associated working the same way that they have been working throughout your adult life. So the advantage is that you are not going to go into a lot of disorder when you have that kind of experience, but they are rigid states as well. So you already have your associations between what is called the default mode network in the brain, and you know that when you are resting, you tend to mind wander a bit. You are not so related, so associated with your physical body, and you tend to have the same kind of experiences. What happens when you give a person a psychedelic? What happens when you give a high hypnotizable person the suggestions you go into a hypnotic state? Then you end up going towards this left area of his model, where you have more high disorder, that is more variable brain connections. The usual brain network systems are not as related, are not working the same way as they usually do, but they are more flexible states. So let me give you an example of how this might work and how this might explain why hypnosis and LSD-assisted therapy and a number of other therapies in which you may use alterations of consciousness may work. You have a patient who comes to you who has an obsessive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. And if you want to talk to him or her, let's say him, if you are going to talk to him and you are going to do traditional therapy, you know how difficult it is to get them out of their thoughts they already have. This happened to me not to me, but to somebody I was dealing with not so long ago. A paranoid individual. Try to convince a paranoid individual that you are not against them. Good luck. Even the fact that you're trying to say, well, no, I'm not trying to do that, is of course a show. It shows that you are trying to trick them. Because there is not a lot of disorder. That is, they already have a set view of what the world is like, what the world and other people are trying to do to them. And it is rigid. It's not going to change, or it's very difficult to change. Give them LSD therapy or something else, then you end up having the brain, different brain network systems doing different connections or being more open. And so at that point, they may have a different way of experiencing others and themselves. And with good luck, maybe they will become a bit more trusting than they were before. So this is a very interesting idea. In our case with high hypnotizable people, what we found is that when they were specifically having spontaneous, not suggested, but spontaneous experiences of mystical interconnectedness with everything there is, they had more what is called omega complexity, which means that the brain, different areas of the brain were doing different things. It wasn't just going the same kind of network activity that ordinarily you would see. So that is just a taste, if you will, about where we can go. So now let's get to the final and more challenging issue. Can anomalous experiences be thought of as alternate epistemological paths? That is, can we obtain valid knowledge about ourselves and about the world? And I would submit to you that the answer is yes, and that there is evidence for this. If you want to know more about this, Harold Wallach is going to speak just after me. He's also working in parapsychology, and we published this book sort of summarizing the literature, all of the empirical evidence for it, which I think is as good, or as bad as you will, but as good as that for traditional areas of psychology. So what you heard in Psychology 101 that people told you, yes, this is what we know in psychology, you could say very much the level of evidence for parapsychological phenomena is at the same level. It's not the same level as physics or chemistry, but it's pretty much at the same level as research in psychology and medicine. So what type of evidence can we have? First, about knowledge about yourself. One, there are just a few studies, three studies, in which people have reported that individuals may have dreams that anticipate something that is going to go wrong in their life. And I mean systematic research, not only anecdotes. So before people are going to catheterization to find out the status of their heart, what may happen is that researchers collect their dreams, and from their dreams, they predict who is having heart disorder or not, who's going to be diagnosed with having a problem. And they do very good diagnosis just judging from the person's dreams, even though the person's own conscious waking experience seem to be at a loss. The person, him or herself, does not know. The dreams seem to know. So we know that, and we have a lot of evidence that does suggest, I would say, that some mediums, I would say the minority, I would say that the vast majority of mediums and so on do give just very general information that sometimes does not really hold water, or that is just too obvious. But there are good studies with a few, again, select individuals that show that people, mediums in Brazil or in other countries, can come up with very accurate information when they are in very controlled situations, so that you know that they cannot end up doing fraud. You can control for statistics, and they come up with what seems like very accurate information. So I would say that yes, anomalous experiences can provide accurate information, and this brings us again to our friend Plato. Just as a reminder, in the Republic, when he had the metaphor of the cave, what he proposes that what we are like prisoners. Prisoners of what? Our sensory experiences while we are awake. In Carhart Harris terms, of our entropic but more rigid brain states. So what the sense information is providing us, we think, is all there is to it. But we are here in a cave. We're just seeing the shadows of what is happening up here, but we take these shadows as being the actual representation of reality. And it is not. It is just shadows. So that is the metaphor that we have. And the issue is that there is evidence coming from a number of areas that ordinary consciousness does not provide absolute precise descriptions of the real, of what is out there. Maybe we can never get them, but if you look at this, you can check, is this darker than this point in the center? And I think most of us will say, yes, this is absolutely darker than this is. And it isn't. It is just a visual illusion. Or if you start looking at the center here, you will start seeing that these are vibrating and gyrating. And I'm not messing with your mind. They are not. And we have a number of different kinds of illusions when we are tricked, and of course where we are tricked in the very small range of the electromagnetic radiation that we can actually conceive. So people from cognitive psychology such as Hoffman or quantum physics such as the great theoretical physicist Bertrand d'Espagnac, for example, wrote, what we call reality is just a state of mind. It is a particular way of measuring things. And he says, this veiled reality means that we will never actually know exactly how things are. So I'm also skeptical when people say, yes, I know how all of this works. Well, please tell me, because I don't. And I'm not sure that any of us can say it. Nonetheless, other states can provide insights into those kinds of realities. For example, the interconnectedness that you have been hearing about, or in the case of precognition, whether some event that happens in the future can affect the past. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can look at the net at retrocausality. That is a phenomenon in physics in which you can find out that some event that happens later in time affects something that happened earlier on. And this is not about New Age parapsychology, fuzzy researchers. This is a well-accepted kind of physics event. So, to conclude, let me just stop with Plato again, or Socrates as channeled, if you will, by Plato. Socrates was the teacher of Plato. And in Phaedrus, he said, our greatest blessings come to us by way of madness, mania, in the original Greek. And he did not mean pathology. What he meant, I think, in my 2016 terms, is by way of anomalous. Some, maybe I should qualify, comes to us by way of some anomalous experiences, provided it is given us by divine gift. I do not follow any particular god or goddess or goddesses, but I would say that it is provided that it does not come just from our own particular lacks and wishes, but that it is more an openness to the unbounded kind of reality of which we all can partake of. So thank you for your attention.